Welcome to the Fiscal Fortress. Michelle.meiming, a distinguished lawyer, and Eric.chung, a veteran hedge fund manager, deliver insightful commentary on finance and the law and actionable advice. The Fiscal Fortress, where wealth meets wisdom.
Hey, Michelle, it's great to see you.
It's great to see you too, Eric. How's your week going?
So far, so good. Yeah, we're getting ready. We're getting close to the holidays. We're getting ready to go to Tahoe. My family, both kids are skiers. So we are going up to Tahoe in a few days to enjoy the snow, and we're going to spend the Christmas holiday there.
That sounds like fun. Our kids are not skiers. We're going to go down the opposite direction, down to Southern California and then to Mexico as well.
Oh, wow. That sounds amazing. Yeah. What part of Mexico are you guys going to?
Well, it's going to be on a cruise, so there'll be different ports, and the key part about that cruise is just that we're going to be with meeting up with a lot of friends and family, so that part will be very fun.
So for today's episode, what's the legal topic?
I was going to talk about trust administration because the interesting part on that is that's where we actually, as the saying goes, the proof is in the pudding. Whether a trust was well created or not comes down to the test when somebody has passed away, and then either the trustee or the trustee and the professional, though the lawyer, will actually need to carry out what's in the trust.
Sounds like a really interesting topic. And I think for most people who have trusts, me included, we kind of set up the trust and just assume that if we were to pass away, that everything would magically happen seamlessly and very promptly.
Well, yes, there are going to be notice requirements if the successor trustee decides to hire a professional, such as an attorney and a CPA, to work with the trustee before distributing the assets. There are formal requirements and legal requirements that need to be prepared and sent to government agencies, to the assessor's office, and all those requirements that if without a professional, it would be impossible to know what to do next.
So once you have these trust documents, it sounds like there are a lot of steps after you pass away that still need to happen. For somebody who is thinking about setting up a trust, you have to basically line up all these people in advance, or is this something that the people who are your trust, the trust beneficiaries, that they can handle afterwards?
It is something that it is always good to check the document while the settlor is alive, and making sure that things are as clear as possible, that the trust is drafted with the administration of the trust in mind. So sometimes clients will come to me with a very short trust, and there's a lot of things missing, like in terms of just when it comes to the administration. How do things happen? And if that's not explicit, that makes the back end of the job much harder. And the back end is really where the substance comes in. Whether you can test how good a trust was is when you actually need to carry it out and find out if there's actually more answers than questions, or if things were planned so well that things are very clear in terms of just marshaling the assets, sending notices to creditors, for instance, sending notices to beneficiaries, and then after a certain waiting period, then the distribution happens. So it could happen in a smooth case. Even for a well-designed trust, it should still wait 4 to 6 months before the distribution happens. And then for things that are more complicated, it will take a little longer, depending on the family dynamics, whether the beneficiaries all decided to hire a lawyer. That would make things a lot more complicated than if things were clear and everybody was on the same page. That would make the administration go a lot faster.
Okay, right. And that's like one of the key benefits of a trust compared to a will is it's the time. I remember in previous episodes you had said that if you have a will, it could take a year or 2 years for everything to resolve itself, but this is a lot faster. Does the trust also make it more bulletproof or less likely for your wishes to be contested compared to a will?
It should. I mean, it all depends also on the kind of will and the kind of trust. So, for instance, a will can be written by a person's own hand. And so that's called a holographic will. When people choose to do a will in that form where they write it out themselves, that is subject to a lot of scrutiny because it is not clear what their mental state was, and they didn't have a professional who spoke with the person to check their state of mind. So that is going to be a lot more problematic. And then even if the will was done with a professional, a will still needs to go through probate court. The difference in having a trust is that the trust can avoid probate court altogether if the parties and the trust is clear. So, but then even in the world of trust, if a person dies with a trust, whether or not it's bulletproof depends on whether an experienced professional prepared it or if the client decided to populate a trust on their own without any legal advice. So all of that comes out to the test when a person passes away.
Right. It almost seems like at the risk of oversimplifying, one of the real benefits of having a trust is that usually, and I know there are exceptions, but usually you're going to hire a lawyer for that. And when you've got a competent lawyer helping you, they're going to make sure they dot the I's and cross the T's. And that's going to be probably result in something far superior than in the example you gave. You just jotted your wishes down on a piece of paper in a holographic will. Like that's probably going to be the worst way to do things.
Correct. It would be. It's there's a lot in terms of the details on how to carry out a trust, and hiring a professional is the best way to go, just because you are trusting that person to be there for the family when the time comes. And a large determining factor in terms of whether or not the lawyer is able to do a good job with the administration is actually, being on both sides, doing the planning and the administration, because by administering, it's very clear what should have been in the planning in the first place.
Anything else that you want to add about administration of trusts?
It's just, it can take months longer than the planning part. So the planning part usually can be done within 3 to 4 weeks. And the administration part, because of the legal notices that have to go to governments, to have to go to beneficiaries, that will take months. So even though a person can have a perfectly drafted trust, the beneficiaries and trustees should expect at least a 4 to 6 month window at a minimum, even in the fastest turnaround, in order for assets to be distributed. And that's why when I meet with my clients, I always ask if that client has liquid assets that are outside of the trust to pay bills while that period is happening, because during that 4 to 6 month period, there should be no distribution, but bills continue to have to be paid, right, for property taxes, for income taxes of the decedent. And so there should definitely be a reserve fund that's outside of the trust to keep the liquidity going.
How much does all this cost, like the administration part or phase of the process?
That can vary. So whereas the planning part is typically done on a flat fee basis, the administration part is going to be hourly, because it's really hard to know whether beneficiaries will contest and whether they're all going to hire their own lawyers. So the complexity of the administration is hard to know. And so the fees will typically vary between $5,000 to $10,000 on a typical file. So what about on the financial side, Eric? Can you tell us a little bit about what's on your mind?
Yeah, one of the things that's really interesting and exciting about the new Trump administration is that he is bringing into his administration people who are business people, who are not career bureaucrats. And one example of that is David Sachs. This is a name that may be very familiar to people in Silicon Valley. I know you and I have talked about David and his podcast, the All In podcast. He's a venture capitalist, and he recently was appointed to be the AI and Crypto Czar for the United States.
I wonder, though, in terms of the fact that he has investments in these types of companies, it seems to me that there could be a conflict of interest.
Yeah, it's a good point. Just to take a step back, he, as I mentioned before, he's a venture capitalist, and he's very familiar with crypto and AI. And to your point, he has invested in these technologies. I remember listening to the All In podcast, and he had made quite a bit of money in he investing in a fund that had purchased Solana, a cryptocurrency that's pretty popular. So he's made a lot of money through that. And similarly, Trump has been very, very bullish on Bitcoin. I imagine that David will be in charge of advising or executing on the plans to set up a strategic Bitcoin reserve. Trump is also, definitely he's surrounded himself with other people who are very bullish on crypto, like Elon Musk. On the AI front, his co-host on the All In podcast, Chamath Palihapitiya, has set up a number of startups that specialize in AI, both software and hardware. And I wouldn't be surprised if David Sachs has a piece of that action if he had co-invested in some of those companies. So you're absolutely right. I mean, he does have something to gain here. I think that he would probably argue that this means he's more competent and qualified to lead these initiatives. And, that's better, somebody who's invested in these initiatives, rather than somebody who may not have a conflict of interest, but doesn't have the competency. And the person that comes to mind is in the previous administration, or the current administration rather, Kamala Harris was designated as the AI czar. But if you look at her resume, it's really questionable what experience she has doing that job.
Mm-hmm. I think it will be very interesting and entertaining to see how things will unfold, because it does feel a little bit like a reality show in terms of, and it is reality, in terms of how the government and his advisors are going to regulate the economy and other aspects.
It's true. Yeah, some people have been less charitable. Instead of a reality show, they've called the appointments a circus, a clown show. That's probably beyond the scope of this podcast, but needless to say, there's been a lot of controversy about his appointments. I would say that probably David Sachs and Elon Musk are less controversial than some of the other appointments, but what is clear is that he's shaking up things in a big way. Previously in Washington, the heads of agencies and the people in leadership positions were career politicians. And that's no longer the case. The people that Trump's bringing in, these are, in most cases, or in many cases, billionaires, very successful business people in their own right. I guess we shouldn't be surprised, since Trump himself is not a career politician, and he himself is a billionaire. But these are the types of people that will be leading our country and the executive branch for the next 4 years.
And I think that's probably never happened before in history, where capitalists are having such a huge influence on government.
I think that's right. And probably if we went back, there are probably examples where it was close. I remember Ross Perot, who at the time was a billionaire technologist as well. This is, a long time ago. He didn't win the election. But yeah, I don't remember the last time a non-politician became the president and did what Trump's doing. This will be very, very interesting. And some people think it'll be scary because he's shaking up the status quo.
Yeah, I think a lot of the leaders around the world are also, even if they are going to know that tariffs are on their way, are actually trying to, whether, how they feel personally, they're trying to be in the good graces of Trump and visiting him at his golf course.
Yeah, at Mar-a-Lago, a lot of people like even Mark Zuckerberg, who previously was critical of Trump and certainly was not counted as one of his supporters, recently, his company made a big donation to Trump for his inauguration ceremonies. And I think a lot of people are definitely lining up to be in his good graces. One of the things that I'd like to talk about is if you're an investor, certain areas that you should look into or you should talk to your financial advisor about.
I would be curious to see whether someone like David Sachs is going to also think for the average unsophisticated investor, as opposed to just his peers who are highly sophisticated and of with great means.
You raised a really good point. Whether he's going to be just looking out for his billionaire buddies or whether he's going to be doing something that'll help all Americans. There is currently, on that point, there's currently a sea change in the way people think about the role of government. People like David Sachs and Donald Trump believe that historically the government has overregulated, has been too protective of the little guy. And you look at, the SEC's regulation of crypto, they've been very critical that Gary Gensler, the current chairman of the SEC, has been heavy-handed. And at the same time, I will say that David Sachs is very thoughtful about AI regulation. He would say that he's not in favor of regulation for the sake of regulation, that when bureaucrats and lawmakers get involved in something that they aren't competent in or they don't know about, they can actually hurt America by regulating things and essentially giving other countries like China or regions like Europe the upper hand. AI is a great example of that, where we could, there's a lot to worry about. If the United States regulates heavily AI companies, what does that do for our leadership in this space? Does it give the Chinese an opportunity to leapfrog us in that technology? And what are the larger ramifications? So I think these are open-ended questions that smart people can disagree on.
And I'm hopeful that because people who are in the billionaire space have got more money that than they can spend in a lifetime, that they actually don't care as much about money per se, kind of like Warren Buffett. And at that point, they're just trying to do the right thing by using their experience to help the country.
Yeah, it's a really good point. It reminds me of, the reason that federal judges are appointed for life and they're fairly well compensated. Same thing with police officers generally in our country compared to other countries. And the idea is that, the people who, if people have a need for money, if they feel like they're undercompensated, then they do shady things. And conversely, you raise a really good point. One could argue that these really wealthy people, they've already made their money, so they're not going to, be focused on, they're not going to be as easily corruptible. It's a really hot topic, especially with the recent controversy about, members of Congress outperforming the stock market and using their information to insider trade. Hopefully those sorts of things will be less likely to happen by the billionaires. I think sadly though, where there's a lot of money, and indeed in crypto investing and AI investing, there is a lot of money, bad behavior is just going to happen across the board. So I do think people have to go into it with their eyes open.
It will be a very interesting 4 years ahead to see what changes happen in the law.
And just to be a little bit more actionable about how these changes in the law could benefit everyday investors on crypto, they're going to be loosening these regulations. So this should theoretically be good for Bitcoin. We've already seen the price of Bitcoin go up and up and up. Again, you should talk to your financial advisor. You shouldn't invest in anything that you don't fully understand. But other public companies like Coinbase, and again, full disclosure, I used to work there, still have some stock of Coinbase. That could be a beneficiary of this deregulation. On the AI front, there are, the rising tide has floated all boats. Big tech companies like Google, Apple, Microsoft have all done really, really well. NVIDIA, because of AI. The one thing I would note is that everybody in the All In podcast, including David Sachs, has been very, very critical of big tech and has alleged that they're monopolies. And so there could be, it could be a better bet to bet on medium or smaller size companies, because a lot of people want to see some of these big companies being broken up. And that's already starting to happen, starting to materialize with recent judicial decisions that have been negative and have declared Google a monopoly. So that's something to watch out for.
Right. And on the topic of cryptocurrency, Eric, because you have worked previously at Coinbase, if any of our audience members wants to talk to you about cryptocurrency, you would be open to that, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And again, you should talk to your own financial advisor. Nothing I say would be, it should be construed as financial advice, but always willing to help and educate people and give my opinions on things that I know about. And similarly, would welcome anybody who has questions about trust administration or any legal issues to reach out to Michelle. We're always here to answer your questions. And further, if you have any suggestions for future episodes or any questions, you can also post them in the comments on our YouTube channel.
Yes, we do check our comments, and we would love to hear some feedback in terms of whether or not this content was interesting to you. And if there's some other topics you'd like us to cover, please let us know. Okay, bye for now.